Okay, I really hope you're seeing the slide, are you?
Yes.
Okay, good. So we'll play from current slide. So I just want to explain something about the way I'm modeling and thinking about civilizations and history. You'll remember all this from last time. I just wanted to make clear, you know, I say at the bottom of all this that is violence. That's what's driving everything up to any attempt to reduce violence. Warlords consolidating, police finally being established. Even religion has incentives to reduce violence. Obviously, laws, trade and prosperity. If people stop fighting, they can enjoy material wealth. And besides, money has power. And then to put in a system where people have to consent, obviously that's going to reduce power, and reason and science, all the good stuff. And then what Tina and Carol and Iko taught us about the Italian Renaissance and Florence and all that. But when I went through this last time, I didn't emphasize enough that this is all to manage the drive for power. If we don't have power and our next door neighbor does, that creates problems. So the quest for power. And then the most recent example of this is the Taliban takes over, and what do? They immediately execute the ISIS leader in the jail because there's been a clash of power at the most basic level. They're all Islamists, so they have that commonality, but there was a clash for power, and that trumped everything. I want to add an element that I'm going to call moral power, because I'm seeing more and more evidence that it is generating a lot of energy in our culture at this particular moment, moral power. So I'm most concerned about the abuse of it. Of course, if we were giving testimony to God and the angels, and we look at history and we'd see how African Americans have suffered, we would grant the Black Lives Matter a lot of slack, and we would forgive a lot. That's what affirmative action was all about. But people being people, when they have that power, and there is a power, moral power that comes from being a victim, it's liable to abuse. And you know, just generalizing from that, our huge problem with inequality and the maldistribution of resources in this country give the political left in particular a feeling of moral power, that anything can go. And so we see there's a lot of shaming in our current cancel culture. And not everybody's on Twitter. 20% of the population is, but 2% drive 80% of the Twitter feeds. And I'm told that there's a group among that 2% of influencers who drive a lot of the language on Twitter, which in some sense is an abuse of moral power, and it seems to be polluting our political dialogue. The cancel culture, just the most recently, Manuel Miranda, who did Hamilton and cast Jefferson and Washington with African-American actors, he got critiqued for his new musical, which is about the neighborhood where he grew up, in that there weren't enough people displaying Latin culture who were dark-skinned in his production. And so he got called out just for the shade of skin of the actors that auditioned and were chosen on merit. So he apologized. And this is what we're seeing happen. And then Bill Maher, who's a comedian and talks a lot about the culture and the zeitgeist, he got angry at Lin-Manuel for bending the knee. So you get all these ridiculous arguments in our culture, and it's driven by Twitter for the most part. And ex-President Obama weighed in, saying, being as judgmental as possible about other people, that's not activism. And he summarized my attitude. This week, The Economist came out with a special cover edition on this problem, the cancel culture, and they referred to it as wokeism and group identity. And they looked at the way it's affecting, they had 5 articles, how it's affecting academia, philanthropy, social media, journalism, and politics. If anybody wants to read those, I've cobbled them together and I could send them on to you. So to deal with different questions, I keep going back to our checklist of the six domains of power management. So if I'm going to consider this question, is wokeism and cancel culture an abuse of moral power? And then I go back to this. And I see how it's affecting every level of our civilization, including the teaching of math. We've learned that Oregon public high schools have recently given a pass to people of color who fail math tests. I'm not sure that's a good idea. So we certainly see it expressed in the arts. There's a lot. There was one commentator that recently asked, why is the viewing of the Oscars decreasing? And the answer was, gee, it seems like there's an awful lot of wokeism now in the Oscars, and it's lost the appeal to the general population. So I just want to add a personal note on this whole business of wokeism and Twitter. Our son is a journalist. And he's been covering in particular the protests and trying to report them even-handedly. In doing that, he's been critical of both sides, but Antifa is not used to being criticized by the mainstream press, and so they have targeted him on social media. And now they're targeting him physically, as he tries to cover different protests. And he just had this an opinion piece published in Newsweek. Newsweek's not what it used to be. And it's pretty much just a website. Nevertheless, he finally could get his point of view out into the mainstream. Switching gears away from the abuse of moral power and my rough take on it, last night, our founder of our whole study group, Ramsey, is back after a year and a half of building a house. He made the best use of his time during COVID as anybody I know. And last night he reviewed 2,300 years of Western civilization up to the French Revolution. And that pretty much covers at least 2/3 of what Juan Jose and I have been talking about. Update on Juan Jose, destination still Hungary, but now he has to work physically in an office. And that's why we're not seeing much of him. It was a nice dovetailing of what we've been doing for the last with Juan Jose and I 17 months, and we taped it, and I want to give a call out, an acknowledgement to Carol for being the cameraman last night. We had a few difficulties. I won't go over that in detail, but we got most of it. I'd say perhaps 85% of it. And I'll try to find a way to distribute it. But we had to use a new way, and I couldn't do it by Zoom, my usual way, and post it on YouTube. So it was just, we scrambled and came up with something. Ramsey was his usual expansive self, seeing large trends in history, that he sees the forests and not the trees, and it's breathtaking, some of what the forests look like from his viewpoint, 50,000 miles up in the air. That'll be available, I hope. He did have a recommendation to read or listen to Michael Wood's YouTube on the barbarian West, the history of the barbarian West, as he calls it. And there was a list that he came up with in the middle of the broadcast, and Aiko and I paused it and reran it and wrote down. He said, if you had a great civilization, you would combine the Arab science, Babylonian astronomy, Hindu mathematics. So that covers the realm of science pretty well. And then add Chinese science, the education, particularly explored first in the universities of Baghdad, a faith, and he chose the Sufi version of Islam as an ideal way of life. He mentions Jewish intelligence and Christian conduct when we're on our good behavior and not fighting religious wars. The Greek curiosity, really, and knowledge. And then finally, Indian mysticism. There is something unknown about the universe and the cosmos, and they have that unique vision. So it fits so much with the mandate of Juan Jose and my destinations and contemplations over the last 17 months, that I thought I'd throw that up as a slide. And if we had all those Michael Wood's claims the people like the Arabic humanists would give us the world would be perfect. All right, so enough of those tangents. Back to the Pashtuns. So last week, Aiko asked, are there any Bactrians now? And no, there are no people that specifically say we live in Bactria, because that territory is now part of all of these three countries. And the spread of the Persian language from the West led to the decline of the local Bactrian language. And as I've said multiple times, I think language is what defines a culture more than anything, and carries attachments to then civilizations, depending on the times, more than DNA. It's our brains, not our DNA, that create culture. And then last week, I was asked, what is Afghan in relationship to the word Pashtun? And I said they're the same, and that's true for the pre-nation state. They're the same. And this is from an author named Sadiq, who I'll introduce you to more in detail later. But it was identical to until the time of nationhood, and that comes really in the 1700s. And then there are other people who join that nation, and so now the term Afghanistan as a country has to be broader. So you're going to have Tajiks who consider themselves members of Afghanistan. I'll go into that detail if there's more questions. Let's just review a little bit of what we talked about since we've been diverted. Languages, the Indo-European languages dominate most of Afghanistan. Pashto is an Indo-European language. And these are in blue, the variations of the Indo-Iranian version of Indo-European, but you see they include Germanic, Celtic, Greek, of course, Indo-European. And we'll talk about the Altaic languages in just a few minutes. So just reviewing the history, the first great civilization to influence the Afghanistan part of the world was the Persians and Cyrus the Great. Then comes Alexander, and he brings the Greek curiosity and knowledge and across the Silk Road. And he commented on the people that he found in the mountains of present-day Afghanistan. They were fierce. They confronted his soldiers, and each one of them in this land can be called an Alexander. A little self-centered, but that's fine. Then come this group of people. This is the last wave of Indo-Europeans into this area from the steppes. From then on, the steppes are controlled by the Altaic people, the Mongols, the Turkic-speaking people, the Huns in particular. but they're another 800 years away. But the last wave of Indo-Europeans from the steppes are the Kushans. And they set up an empire. You see, it extends down into India. So this road, this north-south road, is very important, and arguably it's still the prize in the fight, really, between India and Pakistan. So the interesting thing about the Kushans is, and this is the road, the Khyber Pass in particular, that is so key geographically, a more modern version of it, fought for over and over again. But the key to the Kushans is they converted to Buddhism. And facilitated the movement of Buddhism from India to China and then on to Japan. So hugely influential moment, and it took place in the area that we call Afghanistan. So you had the Bamiyan Buddhas being chiseled out of those cliff sides. And the Pashtuns, no doubt, were part of that. The only thing that we've heard from about the Pashtuns at that time is they were monotheistic. They were no longer believing in the pantheon of sky gods. And so at this moment in history with the Kushan Empire, you have all this trade facilitated, particularly along the Silk Road, and horses become increasingly more important. Of course, the Huns will ride those horses and cause havoc to the Roman Empire, first themselves, but mostly by pushing the Germanic tribes into the Roman Empire just to escape them. But all along the Silk Road is functioning under Kushan security. And then come the Huns, and they're Altaic, as are the Mongols, as are the Turkic people. So they're speaking a totally different language. And Juan Jose, when you get to Hungary, you'll notice the difference immediately. You get off the train and you look at the signs, and you don't see anything familiar. If you go from one Indo-European country to another, you can at least work out some words that are familiar, like telephone, even some syllables. But when you go to Hungary, nothing. It was really something to be in a European country and not be able to figure anything out. So who speaks Altaic? The Japanese. Okay, there's some question, and they throw in this caveat, but that's an Altaic language, as is Korean. And probably the people that went across the Alaskan to America were originally Altaic, which was, as I said before, one reason when Iko was working in the lab on the Navajo reservation, serving both Navajos and Hopis, they would each come in and start speaking to her in their language. So it's just an interesting distinction, and it helps me understand these two bundles of languages distinctly. It just helps me understand and get a grasp on what's happening in the world in terms of culture. As I said, I think culture is the final common denominator is language. So I'm going to, I do want to spend some time with Irene on a topic we talked about last night. We've taken breaks during this COVID pandemic. We took quite a few breaks to talk about the breakthrough in immunizations. And I do want to talk a little bit about where we are now with testing, but I'll save that for the very end. So we dropped off at the end of the last talk with the next Persian dynasty. And it comes in spite of the Huns, it sets up and continues until 651. And that date, if you don't have to memorize dates, but you'll know that that date comes about 20 years after Mohammed makes his big move. So we're going to see them fall to Islam, but we're getting ahead of the story. But this is just like you had Cyrus the Great, the Persians are back, and they inherit the area. The Kushans have come and gone. They lasted about 400 years, which is a pretty good run. And here is another map, since I love maps, and I was reminded last night how much Ramsey loves maps. We're both map dorks. How much maps can be clarifying on history. And so here's the Sassanid Empire, and now in the West, we've gotten the Byzantine Empire, and the West, Rome, has been taken over by the barbarian tribes. But the Persians are imposing some kind of order here, certainly more order than was present in the Dark Ages in Europe. And so Afghanistan is enjoying some security in this time. This is just showing the same thing. This is legend. And I'm going to constantly make the distinction between legend and what we know is happening. My two sources, I have a source on legends, which this is from, and I have a very modern history written by a 40-something Pashtun historian. And so I'm using his stuff on what's well established, which is obviously important, but so's this. What people believe is important, is what motivates them. And when we're gonna, the reason we're learning about the Pashtuns is the Third Empire that tried to take over and build a state in Afghanistan just failed. The British and the Russians, the Soviets before failed, and so have we. So what the Pashtuns believe is really important in this story. And they believe their George Washington, their founder, let's just call him Quace, is the first ancestor of the Pashtun race. That's what they believe. This is not verified by the modern history, what's available as historical sources. And the legend is that he heard about this thing called Islam sprouting up in the Middle East, and that he traveled to Medina before Mohammed had taken over Mecca. Yeah. And he bonded with Mohammed. And even there's some talk about the Pashtuns being the lost tribe. So he meets Mohammed, and he was given a Muslim name by Mohammed. So Abdur Rashid is Quraysh's new name. So he's got two names. And the idea that defeated three empires started then. It's an idea, it's a legend, but it certainly explains part of this picture, which is the Mujahideen praying 5 times a day. And this is in 1987, just as they were about ready to kick out the Soviet Union. And so what's in the brains of these people? What makes them continue to fight and never give up? And so the story of Islam is a big part of the story. So I thought we should at least review that to bear in mind and make sure we're on the same page, knowing what we're talking about. And here on this map, you see Mecca was a central point in the trade routes before Mohammed. At this time in Constantinople, Justinian had produced laws, so that the domain of law and ethics had just been imposed on the Byzantine Empire. And this was pretty close to Mecca and Medina, but Mecca and Medina at this time were like the Greeks. They had their own pantheon of sky gods, and they were not monotheistic at this point. The Persians were. They had Zoroaster, and presumably some of the Pashtuns believed in Zoroaster, but that was denied by the historian, the modern historian. So maybe some of them are still Buddhists. And so this is just another map showing pretty much the same thing. But the important part on this map is the arrow that goes from Mecca to Medina. That's Mohammed being thrown out of Mecca. He'd had the word from the angels, and he started talking this religious talk, and the business people of Mecca threw him out. He was a business person. He was a caravan leader that carried goods from Mecca all the way up to Damascus and back. And he thrived when a rich widow hired him, older than he, but she liked the way he drove caravans, and she hired him. And they famously got married. And so in a break between caravan runs, he's visited by the angel of the Lord, and he gets a message. And he goes back to Mecca. There is a Kaaba in those days, the same kind of building that people walk around. But they had all these pagan idols one for each day of the year, in little niches all around the inside of the Kaaba. And so paganism was the prevailing religion. And so he becomes familiar with Jews. Medina is a Jewish city. And he becomes familiar with the Byzantine Christian ideas, and he is attracted to monotheism. And this is bolstered by the fact that he continues to see endless fighting among the pagan clans and the superstitions. And so when he's at the age of 40, he goes into a cave somewhere on this hill and receives dictation. And the dictation is from the angel Gabriel. Muhammad had nothing to write it down. Muhammad memorized what would become later the Quran. This is depicted in various places. You'll notice the last time Muhammad has no face. And that's one of the dictums of Islam. You're not supposed to show Muhammad's face. And we know that's caused a lot of problems with European cartoonists. This is Persian, where Muhammad's face is shown. This was not created by an Arabic artist. And so finally, the story is he gets enough people in Medina to join him, and through persuasion and battles, there was fighting, just like the tribal warfare they'd always had. He goes back into Medina with the angels. And it's kind of reminiscent of our Palm Sunday. He has no face, and Mecca resists, and so he retreats again, and the Jews assist him in his endeavors. So he adopts the Old Testament as one of his books, and recognizes all of the Hebrew prophets, and specifically Joshua and David, the warriors of the Hebrews. So he and the Jews become close allies in this new religion, and he incorporates them. And he incorporates Christianity, and it's been pointed out that Jesus is mentioned more in the Quran than Muhammad is. Make of that what you will, but it's very interesting. So here he comes, and he's triumphant, and he throws out all these idols all along in those niches along the wall, all of them except let's see. Okay, this is Muhammad here without a face, and he leaves one idol, a sun god named Allah. He leaves one, and so there's just going to be one, you guys. The other interesting thing about the Kaaba and why it's located where it is, there is a black stone, and it's probably a meteor, and it is maintained. It had been worshipped by the pagans. Muhammad keeps it and says it fell from heaven as a guide to Adam and Eve. And Abraham, in the way he tells it as a legend, immigrated to Mecca with the mother of Ishmael, Hagar, not Sarah, not his first wife, but he presumably abandons Sarah for a while and immigrates with Hagar and Ishmael to Mecca. And this is legend. And when people, they have the same legend about Abraham sacrificing a son, but it's not Isaac, it's Ishmael. And it's the same story with the angel stopping him at the last minute. But this is what Muhammad was preaching. And this is what Rashid, the Pashtun who visited about this time, presumably also believed. And he saw this black rock being changed in position, and it's repositioned in the modern Kaaba, the black stone. It's at the corner, and when people walk around, they touch it, they kiss it. Not a good thing to do in times of COVID. And there have been COVID outbreaks in the Hijra, which is the name for the visit to Mecca, which every Muslim is supposed to make sometime in their lifetime. And so salvation is promised. These salvation religions entered the Roman Empire about 300 years before Christ, and there were all kinds of salvation religions. Christianity was only one, but the Muslim version of salvation is similar to the Christian one. There's a heaven, there's a paradise where the good will go after death. Salvation, very different than the Buddhist depiction of what happens after death, or the Hindu. There was a dream that Muhammad had, that he went to Jerusalem at night. He flew there. He never physically went to Jerusalem, but because of this dream, Jerusalem is considered a holy city, even though Muhammad never visited it. But he did in his dreams, and he met all the Jewish prophets, and Jesus too, in his dream. And so he made that connection between them and Islam. So this is Muhammad at his death. Again, you don't see him, his face. It's only a flame. So quite often where Muhammad's face is supposed to be, you'll see a flame. All right. So I'm going to switch gears. I've only got a few minutes left, and I want to talk about something Irene and I talked about last time. We'll resume here in the future. I'm going to skip to a different part of the presentation, and I'm doing this so I don't have to reload. Sorry, you have to watch me scroll. You'll get all this next week, folks. Okay. All right, here we go. So the question that came up, and Irene had some new information for me about screening, and some problems with screening. I want to give two examples of the problems of screening for disease. You do a test, a screening test, it's very different than a diagnostic test for somebody who's sick. And you have to be very careful in interpreting positive screening tests. And I'm going to explain to you why. And I'm also going to explain why this is in the upper part of our brain right now. Our 8-year-old grandson, he goes to a school, and his sister had a runny nose and a cough. So that is part of the protocol. The whole family gets screened. And the sister was negative, but our 8-year-old was positive. And so then case finding, the next step is the whole family now has to quarantine, which has put a big burden, particularly on ICO for homeschooling. But we have found some good resources. We're actually looking forward to sharing with the kids on Amazon for Kids, and then there's an Apple Arcade with the very best and video games, simulation games, the Oregon Trail, that sort of thing. Okay, that's just the digression to explain why I'm focused on this now, and I'm trying to explain to our family the screening test likely is a false positive. Just how likely depends on the current stage of contagion in San Mateo County, where they're located. I want to give an example on how to think about this difficult problem, and get some feedback from Irene. It's been one of my projects. I was put in charge of screening at our hospital. It's one of my hats, and I really got into it. So I just want to give you an example. In the early years of mammography, this was the problem we were facing. We were screening women just by age with mammograms. So no symptoms, no mass, but we're screening, as opposed to a patient. We're screening a healthy population. And if there's a 1% of probability of breast cancer, and you have a mammogram that's acceptable with 90% sensitivity and 90% specificity, of course you're going to go ahead and screen. But if one of your patients comes up with a suspicious mammogram, what's the likelihood she actually has cancer? Using these three numbers. And at the time I got interested, only 3% of practicing physicians could answer the question. They couldn't even get in the ballpark. And I don't think it's improved that much, as I've seen generation after generation of residents come to our hospital. Maybe it's up to 10%. It's a difficult concept to grasp. And so I want to spend a minute on it. Only 8% of women turned out to actually have breast cancer. So we emphasize primary care at our hospital. And so a family practitioner, what do you say to a woman who's tested positive and is waiting for, in those days, the next step was a biopsy. Now there's a lot more intermediate steps to clarify. And so what you tell them is, look, there's only an 8% chance that you're actually going to have breast cancer. That comes from these numbers. And the problem is 90% specificity isn't good enough. You get a lot of false positives. So what do I mean by false positives? Irene and I talked about this 2x2 table last night. This is the focuses on the test. The vertical focuses on the test. They take 100 people they know have breast cancer and
John, this is Irene. Yeah, just interrupting for a second. If you want us to be able to see that 4x4, it's not showing.
Really?
No, we just see you.
Do you see that?
No.
Okay, back. Thank you, Irene.
Sure.
So I am going to start over and at least briefly show you the slides that you've missed. Oh my goodness. How did that happen? I guess I'm not allowed to.
You should be able to share screen.
Yeah, but somehow.
There we go. Look,
somehow,
we've got it.
in the process, it got unshared, and I'm sorry for that.
Yeah.
So this was the first slide, and these are the numbers I gave. So you didn't miss much. You got those numbers.
Yeah.
And you got now only 8% and the problem. So all you missed was text. And if you listen now, now comes the visual part. Thank you, Irene. So the vertical part of this is looking at tests and test performance. So you take 100 people you know have women who have breast cancer, and you give them mammograms.
It's turned off. Thanks.
And you see, and then you give 100 women you know don't have breast cancer, and you give them mammograms, and then you have you get a sense of what the sensitivity is of the test, the ability to pick up people that have the disease, and the specificity, the ability to identify the people that don't have the disease. So that's the vertical world. The horizontal world that I was talking about, Irene, is this world where all you have is the test result. You know your patient, you've ordered the test, you've got the result. And here, the test result is yes, positive. And I'm going to be focusing on these two squares because they're going to be looking at the positives that are true and the positives that are false.
Right.
And this is the way we were taught to number them, and we were told to memorize equations, and they never stuck, and they still don't stick, and nobody knows what's going on. Well, here's what's going on. I allow each cell to expand to accommodate the expected sizes, and I color code them, and then I realign them. So now, if you look at all the tests that are truly positive and can compare it to the diseases that are falsely positive, in this horizontal world, you have some sense of the likelihood of disease, right? And so I apply this to different clinical situations for the residents. This is a test for lupus. It emphasizes the positive aspects of tests and the negative. And it turns out that this test works best if it's negative, because there you get the biggest differential. Here, it's still muddied if you get a positive. And so the other part of this is to make this line here movable. And you move it to reflect the probability of disease. So here, now there's maybe a 25% probability of disease. And I'm maintaining the same relationships. And here it's even less likely. Maybe it's 15%. And you can see the size of the squares beginning to change, and the ratio of the false positives to the true positives is getting larger. And in a true screening environment, here I'm trying to depict 1%. This would be 1%, this would be 99%. I can't even really depict it, but just imagine this is 1% and this is 99%.
Yeah.
Now, the false positives totally dominate
Right.
the true positives.
Right.
And all you need are these three numbers to figure out the areas of these squares, just three numbers: the sensitivity, the specificity, and the prevalence. And so this is the calculation for a mammogram. I had one of our neighborhood kids animate it for me. I won't show you the animation, but this is the true positive square. This is the false positive square. And you do the calculation and you come up with 8%. Well, with COVID, I did the same thing. My grandson's positive. Oh, crap. Well, okay, let's take a deep breath and look at the numbers. Now, there's some improvement. Instead of a specificity of 90%, it's all the way up to 98%. Wow, what could go wrong? You need to know, though, what the prevalence is in the population and the community you're dealing with. If you have a fierce outbreak of COVID, that positive test is going to be more meaningful than if you're doing pure screening. So I looked at a few scenarios with a positive COVID test using my model, so I could explain it to our grandson. And here's the 2% false positives. Here's the 95% of true positive, but in a base population of 10%. And you run those numbers and you get, well, okay, if there really is 10% of San Mateo that has COVID, more specifically, 10% of 8-year-olds asymptomatic in schools in San Mateo, 10%, okay, you'll have a pretty good performance. You'll have a positive predictive value of 84%. But let's reduce the prevalence all the way down here, and now down to 1%. So, and this is a more likely percent. But let's see what happens with the numbers when you do that. It's 32%. So that means that 68% are false positives. And maybe that's where we're sitting as we're waiting for a confirmatory test on our grandson. And I meant to use these numbers to reassure our kids. It's not a slam dunk.
Right.
And let's take it one more step. Let's take it all the way down to 0.1%. Now, I didn't put this in, but this would be 99.9 versus 0.1. And this could be the case for 10,000 8-year-olds asymptomatic going to elementary school in San Mateo. It might be just that low. So now we're sitting somewhere, I think, between a 5% and a 40% chance that the confirmatory process, and it's a process, will turn out to be positive. And the whole family is going to be screened too. So there might be another false positive. And you're going to hear neighbors and friends that are going to have the same experience if they haven't already. And this is the summary of the three different background incidents and what that does to the likelihood that a positive test is a true positive. You can see it drops progressively. So this is just another way of stating it. you're going to have 100 people. The limitations of the test means 2 of them are, by definition, going to test positive. You've got to dilute these false positives out with a lot of the more positive tests you have in your population, the more prevalent the disease is. You've got to at least have 2 to get a 50% likelihood that the test is truly positive. And so it's a matter of diluting out the falsely labeled limitations of the test with significant disease in the group you're testing to get, but the goal is not to get a high true positive rate. The goal is to get a low true positive rate, but to follow up the positives like that you get with demons. So that just summarize that again. And this is the algorithm our son is working under. So is our family. And I promised Irene I'd show this to her. I sent her a copy early this morning. Don't know if you got it, Irene.
I haven't opened it. I apologize. Yeah, this is amazing. Yeah, quite a flow chart.
Yeah. And so if you're positive, they retest you. If you're negative, they test you a 3rd time. If 2 out of 3 are negative, they assume you're negative.
Right.
If you get 2 positives in a row, that's it. So a lot depends on, we're still waiting. We were supposed to get the 2nd test yesterday. And we'll see. Where does this information come from? So by the way, I did a search. What is the background positivity rate in San Mateo? I couldn't get anything on the San Mateo County website, but God bless the New York Times. They give you up to the minute, this is September 7th, test positivity rate in each county. I don't know if they do it in all 3,000 counties, but if with a 3% background rate, and 2% are going to be false positives, maybe, I don't know. I don't even know if this is the correct way to think about it, but it might be that we might be looking at a true positive rate of 1/3. And so this is Contra Costa County, which has a higher rate. We're at 6%. And maybe that means that a positive predictive rate in our county is twice as good as in San Mateo. I say good, but it's bad because we've got more disease. Yeah. So there's all these things. This is the test I wanted to ask you about, Irene. Yeah. We'll come back to that, maybe just the 2 of us. There are other ways of dealing with these 3 numbers, and this is a nomogram. But this is going to get us back now to the Pashtuns. But I am going to stop share on that one at least and come back. I've covered a lot of ground today, and so touched on many different topics. I appreciate your indulgence and patience, and I'll throw it open to questions.
I have a question, Johnny. You have knowledge about this thing, of testing, but how many people can get retested 3 times? I've never heard of it,
Well, if you test positive and you're under some protocol, you'll get tested. So the schools are working with the county to run down every positive. And the people who test positive, the county should be involved. Now, some counties are better than others, but this algorithm that I showed was not developed in the public sector. It was
Hmm.
developed in the private sector. It was developed by Disney Corporation, who had every incentive to get back to I lost Irene, to get back to producing films. And so they instituted a state-of-the-art screening mechanism very early, and they accepted that there would be false positives, because for them, they just wanted to find every true positive, even if that meant falsely identifying a lot of people with false positives. They were willing to bear that burden. And so they generated the data that supplied this algorithm. It's the algorithm that they developed finally to keep Disney in business making films. And presumably it's the algorithm that's going to keep our schools running without overloading our hospitals and emergency rooms. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
I think Irene is on another call with boosters. There's a special, she's on with, they're talking about the booster shot. So I think that's where Irene went. It started.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you for clarifying, Barbara.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk to her a lot privately, because we had an excellent conversation last night after Ramsey was done. So maybe I'll give her a portion of next week's session to reply and add some of her wisdom as a virologist.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Okay, folks, thanks. I'll stop recording, allow you to ask informal questions or gossip if you want. So unless somebody has something to add to the recording, I will stop. 1, 2, 3, stop.